You're here because you know something. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Don't worry, don't be afraid, ever. This is just a ride.
Vibrations, I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations.
Okay, welcome back to Good Vibrations, and we're chatting today with a name who is going to be quite familiar to anyone that checks this series on a regular basis. It's his third appearance, and we keep getting him back because there's always stuff to say that he looks into and researches, and it's all fascinating stuff. We're talking Ole Dammegard. Hey Ole, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Mark. How's it going?
Yeah, it's good, mate. It's good. We're doing what needs to be done. So we're chatting to you over in Spain again, I believe.
Yeah, I've just returned from the Open Mind Conference in Holland, in Amsterdam, and that was quite an experience.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. I'm sure people are aware that you're a researcher, journalist and activist, and your specialist area pretty much is false flag terror events and assassinations, and getting to the real root and the real truth of the story when it comes to high-profile assassinations of political figures and such. So we're going to be getting into much of that as we progress. But yeah, the Open Mind Conference in Amsterdam took place recently, and it's related to the Open Mind Conference in Copenhagen. It's a sister event that's coming up in September. We can talk about that as well. But we did touch on this with Frank Rasmussen, who was our last guest, who is also involved with Open Mind. And he was talking about this controversy, I guess you would call it, with one of the scheduled guests for Open Mind Amsterdam, Chris Bolin. And there was all this stuff that emerged regarding his apparently anti-Semitic views, so-called, on the Holocaust and such. So maybe you just want to recap on how that whole thing blew up and what the latest developments are on that front.
Yeah, it's I've spent some 30 years looking into these different topics that you were talking about. And I was very honored to be invited to this Open Mind Conference in Amsterdam. It was me, Ken O'Keefe, Christopher Bolin, Ian R. Crane, and Frank Rasmussen. Frank Rasmussen is actually the brain behind the Open Mind Conference. Mm-hmm. And a few months ago, or maybe 6 months ago, I was contacted by a super guy in Holland. His name is Willem Veldenhof, and he wanted to do something similar in Holland. So I said, why don't you get in touch with Frank? I put them in touch, and boom, it just took off like incredible. And the whole idea behind the Open Mind Conference is like, follow the truth wherever it takes you. Don't be, even if it might be very upsetting sometimes and might shake your foundation, your belief foundation, the truth is still the truth. And it's through the liberation of the truth behind all of these masses of lies that our freedom awaits, I would say, because we're entangled in so many lies where most of us don't even know that we're being lied to.
Yeah.
And one of the major lies that, or the major topics that you're not allowed to touch at all is the Holocaust and the topics around that, or the facts around that.
Yeah.
And for me as a journalist and just investigator or researcher, I think whatever area you should be allowed to look at, and the truth fears no investigation. That's my experience. The truth is clean, pure, often hidden in lies and conspiracies, but the truth is still the truth.
Well, they always say, don't they, if you want to find out who's running things, then find out who you're not allowed to criticize.
That one is like 200-300 years old, that quote. And
still holds true.
It is so true. And
otherwise you're an anti-Semitic, homophobic conspiracy theorist.
The thing is that if you have a lot of theories or facts about Islam or Muslim countries or whatever, no problem. Whatever area in life you want to approach and look at, there's no problem at all, except the Holocaust.
So it seems, yeah.
And it's so, this is an area that I normally don't go into because it's so sensitive and so I would say, infected. But it's the reason why I recently went into it. I did a 2-hour interview on Red Eyes Creations just a month ago, 2-3 weeks ago. The only reason why I did that was to stand up and say, we need to be able to talk about these things, to look at them openly. Because in some countries, I don't know how many countries now, but I know in Germany, I think in Austria as well, and some people say 17 countries. I'm not sure about that. But even to raise the question about the numbers of 6 million people that was killed in these concentration camps in the gas chambers, even questioning it will put you in jail.
Yeah, amazing.
And that is not on in my world, you know. In that is how we are being controlled in that case. And also when you see, if every time a researcher, if there's nothing else they can stop him with, they throw this anti-Semite right in his face and try to stop it. So because of that, I mean, I've heard people, researchers talking about Building 7, in the 9/11 thing, that Twin Towers went down and then Building 7 went down. When he was talking about controlled demolition when it came to Building 7, one of the major TV stations, if it was CNN or Fox TV, I can't remember, hammered him with being an anti-Semite when he was talking about a building being brought down. But the case that he brought forward was so well built on facts that there was nothing left that they could stop him with. And I saw there's an amazing interview with a former female government representative, some kind of minister from the Israeli government, and she says openly that it's standard procedure. If we can't stop them in any other way, we just call them anti-Semites, and that normally brings them down.
Yeah, it's a
so
standard
this
tactic.
is not something I come up with. That is the facts. This is what they hammer you with if there's no other ammunition they can use.
Exactly, as a catch-all term to discredit people, same as conspiracy theorist.
It is, and conspiracy theories was a term that was created right after the JFK assassination to shut people up. You know, as soon as there was a serious investigator that looked at the facts and just said, "Oh my God, there were multiple shooters here. You must be brain dead not to see it." But as soon as you even raised the question, you were hit with this conspiracy theorist.
And if any of these official versions of events were completely true, the way we're told by the establishment that they are, then they would stand up to scrutiny. So they would have nothing to fear by researchers and journalists delving into it and scratching around just to see if everything checks out and all the figures are correct. You know, if they've got nothing to hide. You know, this is what governments tell us all the time about surveillance and spying. They say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. So the same thing would apply to them. If the story checks out and stands up to scrutiny, they've got nothing to fear through researchers and journalists looking into it. And yet they seem to be terrified of what they might find. And so they've made it a jailable offence, as you say, in many countries, to question the Holocaust. Why would that be if it checks out?
I totally agree. The thing is, I love the truth. I love it. It's so simple. What happened, happened. You know, you can have different witnesses on a crime scene that will give different versions of what happened, but it doesn't matter. That won't change the truth. The truth is still the truth.
Yeah.
And so whatever the case, you should be able to look at it. I totally believe in transparency. You know, whatever it is, if it's the truth, it will stand, and it will, like I said before, fear no investigation. It stands on its own. But as soon as you go into criminal scenes or criminal, crime scenes or whatever, where they're like a cover-up, you will be met with like a wall of lies. The more lies, the more obvious it is that something wrong is going on here. And when you look at these things, you're just they try to stop you any way they can. And the thing is, when you look at it, you know, like this 6 million figure of Jewish people that was supposedly killed in the gas chambers in the Second World War. When you really start looking into this area, I mean, it's an awful area to look into, but since this one is being used to stop us today to look into other things, we need to expose it, in my opinion. And if you look at the fact, there weren't even 6 million Jews in Europe at the time, in these countries where they were supposed to be killed in these gas chambers.
That's what
and
I've
also
heard,
when you look at the construction of the gas chambers, does not match up at all. You know, these big chimneys that was connected to the gas chambers, no, sorry, they're just chimneys on their own, standing on their own. They're not even connected. And the number of people that are said to have been exterminated, you wouldn't be able to do it even if you tried with modern day crematorium ovens and so on.
Yeah.
And I'm part. We've just published a book. It's a book that I'm proud of being part of. It's a book where many I think there's about 12 or 15 heavy researchers like Jim Mars, Jim Fetzer, Nicholas Kollerstrom, you got Sen Gardner, myself. There's a whole bunch of people where we're looking. It's going to be a series of 3 or 4 books, and it's looking into some of the major conspiracies that have been taking place in modern times. And one of them is the Holocaust, and it's in this book. It's called, and I guess we didn't, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. And I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. That's the title of the book. You can find it on Amazon or whatever. And in this, it just takes you step by step by step by step and pull the whole thing apart. You know, like the Majdanek concentration camp, where in the beginning, 2 of these 6 million people were said to have been killed in Majdanek. But the official story has just gone down and down and down and down over the years. And as far as I remember, or I've been informed, I think the latest number is 78,000, down from 2 million to 78,000. And more or less all of these people died of exhaustion, malnutrition, or typhus. So we're back to a major question. But I would recommend people, instead of listening to me, get hold of the book, look into these things, make up your own mind, and just ask yourself, is it correct or is it right that people like myself, just for putting up a question saying, listen, if the official number is not even 6 million, nowhere near it, if I say that I do not believe in 6 million, should I be put in jail? I mean, it's totally absurd.
And it's the only event or the only piece of history where that applies, where, you know, it's that sensitive and it's that controversial that you can be jailed for questioning it. It's pretty unique in that area. So it raises questions. It raises questions about how much of the version of history that we're fed and the version of what goes on in the world that we're told is invested in this event. And it raises questions about who would have an interest in having that kind of investment in this event. You know, which kind of groups would have an interest in people believing this story, and to what end? What could the ulterior motive be? These are big questions, but, you know, people that love truth will want to reflect on these.
I think extremely important questions, because the thing is, our history has been written by the victors. Every time somebody you've never heard the story from the loser's point of view.
Yes.
Whoever lost a war or battle, you never hear their version.
That's right.
You never hear the Native Indians' versions of what happened. You know, it's always General Custer and all of these things. It's always the Allied being the heroes, and in the Second World War, the Nazis being the bad boys and so on. But I tell you, the more things that come up to the surface, the more that it's exposed nowadays, it's just like, sometimes I feel it's almost painful that it's like my brain is being pulled apart, because so many things that I thought I knew or I believed that I knew turns out to be built on lies.
Yeah.
And these lies have been done by design to keep us not aware of what's going on, so that we will not react against this very dark agenda that has been pushed forward, with most of us being asleep. So this is why my website is lightonconspiracies.com, because that is exactly what I think we need. We need to shine the light, totally non-violent, but put the spotlight right on these things. The darker the corners are, or the darker the rooms are, get the light in there, expose it, and let this world heal itself, because we can do that.
Exactly. It's like when you go into a room full of roaches and turn the light on, they run for cover. That's what we need to do, make these cockroaches run. So Christopher Bolin is a guy that had raised many of these questions regarding the Holocaust and whether the numbers all check out. And he got himself into a bit of bother with certain groups in Holland, right? Connected to the Open Mind Conference.
But as far as I know, Christopher Bolin has most of the time focused on 9/11, but pointed out a lot of connections to Israel in this crime case.
Yeah.
But by doing so, this is the thing. If you point your finger at Israel, that is when this thing happens.
Exactly.
Then they hit you with the anti-Semite thing.
So it seems it was a small part of his work where he'd addressed this, and it wasn't the main crux of what he talks about, but it had been focused on and singled out, that particular aspect of his work, by certain interested parties to, try and get him removed from the bill of this event because they didn't want him speaking publicly.
The thing was that they wanted to shut this down, because Ken O'Keefe is very direct. This is a very powerful speaker, and this man's got balls. He speaks straight at what he sees as being the truth.
For sure.
And he also is very critical towards Israel and their behavior in the Palestinian question and these things, where I would say, if you look at it objectively, we're talking genocide. It's not a matter of war or a conflict. It's just absolute slaughter of a small innocent group of people.
Yeah. I did a podcast with Ken O'Keefe last summer alongside Max Egan, and it was right in the midst of Israel's latest incursion into Palestine, and they were talking about just the genocide and the horror that was going on there. So we certainly covered that at the time.
The sad thing is it's still going on. The rest of the world, we're just looking at it and saying, oh my God, this is not right, but nobody's doing anything, and they're being killed, and it's awful. Really, it's awful. We should all be ashamed, because all of us should just have, a long time ago, have just stood up and said, absolutely no way can we tolerate this. Let's see how can we stop it. But we're too busy with our own lives. I include myself, and this is no good.
Well, I think if it happened closer to home, English people, if this was going on in Scotland or Ireland, I think there'd be a bit more interest.
But I live in the south of Spain. I see the Mediterranean from my window. It's just on the other side of the water. If you go east, you can take a boat here and sail there.
Yeah,
it's so close. It is so close to all of us. You take a car from England, you can be there in 3 days or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
It's no excuse for us to act the way we do, or not act at all. Anyway, so Christopher Bolin pointed his finger at Israel. Ken O'Keefe pointed his finger at Israel. I went out with this interview on Red Eyes just a few weeks ago. I was nervous to do that one because I've seen many people go down in flames as soon as they start talking about this topic. Their career gets destroyed, their name gets slandered. It's like it is the one you should avoid.
Yeah,
that was exactly why Henrik at Red Eyes and I did it. So. I had no idea what's going to happen, but so far, so good.
Yeah. One guy whose reputation I remember being torn apart many years ago was a historian called David Irving. And
Yeah.
this was long before I got on the path to truth, but I just remember this kind of sticking out in the news at the time for me. I just remember this guy called David Irving, and he was being absolutely demonised and slammed by the establishment for daring to question the official version of the Holocaust. And back then, I didn't know any better. So, of course,
Neither.
I swallowed the official story, and I thought, who is this guy? You know, what a terrible person to question this. And you know, I didn't even give it any thought at the time that he might actually have a point and there might be something to it. And, you know, many, many years later, I can look back at the way his career was just trashed and his name was made mud. And I can see that, I can see what the agenda was and why it was done in that way.
I was totally the same. I thought he was a Nazi, supporter, and
Yeah.
I did not understand what he was talking about
Yeah.
at that time.
That's what they
There
want
was
you to
also-
think of these people.
Sorry?
That's what they want you to think of these people.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we fell for it.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the first people I saw that started questioning this, he was a bishop or a cardinal or something like that, and he was asked about this, I think, in Germany, where he said, if I answer your question here, I would be put away. There's also a German historian, I can't remember his name right now, but he spoke about these things just like this, without no hatred, no political opinion of the whole thing. Just look at the case. It is not correct what we're being fed. He was put away for, I think, 5 years. He has this beautiful German lawyer who was fighting for him. Then they put her to jail as well, the lawyer.
Really?
I mean, yeah. And I know Sophia Smallstorm has been in touch with both, or with him. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name now. But he's in a situation now. He's free. As far as I know, he is in Germany, and his wife is in the States. And she's not allowed to go there because of his so-called crimes, because then she would be put away as well. And he's not allowed to come to the States because of what he's done. So they're stuck in two different countries, this couple, because of him talking about the truth.
Yeah. So
Very, very odd.
So the attempt was to try and derail the Open Mind Netherlands event, but it went ahead anyway and was highly successful from what I hear. So those attempts failed.
This was the whole thing. I absolutely loved it because a few days before this happened, it turned out that the place that had been selected for this event, it was an old school in Amsterdam. It turned out that was in the Jewish quarters of Amsterdam. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but right by a synagogue and also some businesses around it, I think that was Jewish owned. This started a major campaign, like a smear campaign in Holland, especially in Amsterdam, where they went out and said this was a group of anti-Semites coming with Christopher Bolin leading them, and that this had to be stopped. So they put a lot of pressure of the owner of this old school. So in the end, he pulled out and said, listen, I can't, either you need to get some of the speakers off the program, or I need to pull out.
Yeah.
But thank God for Willem Veldenhof, who is very brave, I think, and under a lot of pressure, he just very calmly regrouped. He had a friend who has this beautiful place that he got hold of just a few weeks ago. It was like, divine synchronicity how this whole thing fell into place. Yeah. And so instead of 2 days, it turned into a one-day event, 12 hours instead. But after they started this smear campaign, I just felt this is not on, So what I did was I got a journalist in Holland to write a little description of what happened, what was going on in Amsterdam, how they tried to stop it. And then I contacted about 50 international radio stations that I've been on their shows before. So I did just send a personal message to all of them, you included, and said, please spread this. Just put the spotlight on Amsterdam and let this backfire right in their face. Because this is not on. We come in peace. We're there to speak peacefully, and we're gonna leave in peace, you know. So these type of attacks not on in my world, and this is what happened. It totally backfired in their face. Instead of them stopping the event, it gave more publicity to it, and more people came. So it was packed, you know, and it was
shining that light again, as you say, just shining the spotlight on Amsterdam. And
I know it. I love it. I love it. Do you know Aikido, the martial art Aikido, where instead of like, for instance, in karate, where you hit and you block the blow very, very brutally, you block the force from the other person. In Aikido, what you do is you're in total balance. If somebody attacks you, you just step out of the way and then redirects the force of the other one's blow into a circular motion, and they go down by their own efforts. Totally peaceful.
Wonderful
totally
parallel.
balanced. Yeah, this is how I see it. You know, they attack, no problem. We get out of the way. No fear. It's not a matter of running away. We stand totally fearless, get out of the way, in balance, in peace, and just redirect their energy so that they go down by themselves. No, I just wanted to mention also that some people went to the first place. They weren't aware that we had moved venue or changed venue. So there were some people that came to the old school, and when they came there, there was quite a few people in the synagogue. Maybe because it was a Saturday. But there were armed police outside, you know, with automatic weapons and so on. But the police also came to the new venue, but they were very kind, you know, and it ended up with them, since we were very peaceful with them, they ended up being very helpful and, you know, offered to help in any way they could and so on. But there was a female government official, her name is Yasmina Haifi. She's working at the Justice Department Division for Terrorist Prevention. And she, I think a few months ago, if I understood it right, she was talking about ISIS and that being like, you know, the tool of Israel and CIA and other forces, like an inside force. And after she did that, she was threatened a lot from her employer. And before this Open Mind conference, she said, I think she went out on Facebook or something saying like, well, that sounds great, I'm going to be there. And they threatened her as well. They what do you call it? They prohibited her from visiting the conference under the threat of losing her job.
Unbelievable.
And she's not even allowed to speak to any press. I think they said like she has a 2-year ban from speaking to the press.
Hey, but it's okay because we live in a democracy and a free country. You know, we don't live in a dictatorship. We live in a democracy.
But this is the wonderful thing when you look at it. This happened in Amsterdam. I mean, if this is not the most laid-back capital in the world officially, where you can smoke pot and you can do whatever you want officially, and then somebody comes and touches these areas, and suddenly this whole dark force shows its very ugly face coming up
there you go.
To the surface.
These touchy subjects, raw nerves.
But this is where it comes up to the surface. So I think it's beautiful when you just push and see what comes up, you know.
Yeah, really. Because
they give it away themselves. So I thought it was amazing that it happened exactly in Amsterdam. Had this been in Beirut, nobody would have been surprised, you know. But this was Amsterdam, of all places.
Yeah.
And if it happens there, I tell you, it would have happened in many, many other places as well.
Oh, for sure. And it just shows you it's a global network with influence everywhere, you know, not restricted to any one country or any small number of countries. It's everywhere.
No. Yeah, totally correct. Totally correct.
Yeah. All right, let's move it on, Ole, to other matters. Yeah. Last time we spoke a few weeks ago, we focused on the false flag terror events because many researchers have shown that's what they were. The Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris and the shooting in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we were talking about this group of crisis actors who, it seems, are on something of a world tour. It's almost as if they're just being bussed around or flown around from place to place, and whenever one of these false flag terror events happens, you see the same old actors just playing different parts in these really badly scripted movies that are being rolled out and presented to us on the news as reality. And it really is like they're doing a world tour. You know, they'll be printing T-shirts and key rings next. And I just want to tie it into your main specialist area, which is political assassinations, as we'd said. And you were starting to talk to me about this group.
Operation 40. It was a group that was, it was under the President Dwight Eisenhower in the late 50s, early 1960s. And he and some people from the CIA and people from the different companies like Standard Oil and United Fruit, these type of companies, they wanted to come up with a secret tool, a secret weapon that they could use against any type of enemy. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter if it was foreign presidents or whoever they had problem with. So they created a secret team, an ultra secret team actually, of assassins. And the task was given to create this. The task was given to Vice President Richard Nixon, who contacted some CIA old wolves like David Atlee Phillips, Ted Shackley, the blonde ghost, and E. Howard Hunt. These three people that had been involved with taking out the dictator of Guatemala, Jacobo Sabens, in I think it was 1954. They were already very much involved in these type of actions. And so they were recruited to start this team of assassins. And a young man was put there to help with the financing. His name was George Herbert Walker Bush. That's George Bush Sr. He was the paymaster of this team of assassins.
Yep, heard of him before.
Okay, you've heard of him before.
Once or twice.
Once or twice. Every time you look into something that smells really bad in modern times, he will be in the center of it.
And he's still around. He's about, 178 years old now, I think, isn't he?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But what they did was they went down to Miami and they started recruiting mostly exiled Cubans, very violent people that had escaped from Cuba. It was former police officers from the Air Force, from former Batista agents and so on. That was very hateful against Fidel Castro and so on. So what they did was also with the help of the mob, there were people involved as well, Santos Traficante, Sam Giancana from Chicago, and Carlos Marcello from Louisiana. These people also involved on the sides of this thing. So this group of assassins, they were about 80 to start with. About 60 of them were people that were used to infiltrate and do all types of different things around the assassination, and around 20 of them were pure assassins. Very violent, very, very brutal people. So they were taken down to Florida. They were trained in the Everglades. They were trained in Louisiana and Lake Pontchartrain, and they were also trained in jungle warfare down in Guatemala. And they were trained in everything from poison to explosives to bazooka to you name it. If it could kill someone, they were trained in it. And to start with, this was a tool that was aimed at taking out Fidel Castro. That was the first task, which they failed with. But then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when JFK had some kind of an enlightenment, I would say almost, when he woke up and saw the level of madness that he was part of, that could almost have destroyed the world with a third world war, nuclear war. After that, he became a very determined individual who just said, oh my God, we need to stop this madness. So he wanted to crush the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He wanted to withdraw out of Vietnam. He wanted to get out of the grip of the Federal Reserve Bank and so many other things. So he was upsetting a lot of people, and they said, let's turn this cannon against him instead. And when you look at the Dealey Plaza and the shooters that was involved, because there were multiple shooters, it was a massive ambush in Dealey Plaza. I can go into extreme details with what happened there. Yeah. But many of the shooters were from Operation 40, shooters, spotters, and so on. The same people, out of these 20 people, they were also involved in the assassination of Robert Kennedy. They were also involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King. They were also involved in the murder of Che Guevara down in Bolivia. They were very central in the whole Iran-Contra scandal, where weapons were flown out of the States and the cocaine, raw cocaine, back into the States, received by people like Bill Clinton, Dan Lasseter, and George Bush Sr., starting the whole crack epidemic that has just totally destroyed the States. And they were also the Watergate burglars. That were all of them except for James McCord was member of Operation 40. They changed the names. Operation 40 was just the beginning, the name that they used to start with. Then for every single operation and project that they were carrying out, they changed it. But these people have been going on. There's some of them, I mean, they're up in their 70s, 80s, but some of them are still involved with violent acts, you know.
Wow.
And there were also people.
Was there any connection there with Olof Palme, the assassination there?
Just going to tell you. Do you know David Atlee Phillips, who was one of the CIA people? He was later the director for the Western Hemisphere of covert operations. I mean, big time player. He was, after he left his job, he was replaced by Ted Shackley, who is also one of these key people in Operation 40. Now, David Atlee Phillips was the CIA controller of James Files, who was the shooter behind the picket fence. He was also the controller of Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy that had to take the fall, that had absolutely nothing to do with this assassination, and was actually trying to stop it. He did everything he could to stop this, and instead they made him the patsy and killed him for it.
Yeah.
But this David Atlee Phillips, he was also the CIA controller of a man that was not part of Operation 40, but working very closely with him. His name was Michael Vernon Townley. And Michael Vernon Townley was part of the overtake of Salvador Allende in Chile, sorry, where they killed him. James Files, the shooter behind the picket fence, was also part of murdering Salvador Allende. And they were also part of blowing up Orlando Lettier in Washington, D.C. with a car bomb, which was the biggest national terror attack on U.S. soil before 9/11. But Michael Vernon Townley was also present in Stockholm, 1986, when the Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme, was gunned down in the street. And not only that, Michael Vernon Townley also in 1973, when they were planning to take out Salvador Allende, he started two different groups where they were tracking down and killing supporters of Allende. And two of these people were Roberto Tieme and another one was Julio Izquierdo. Both of these people were also present in Stockholm on the day when Olof Palme was assassinated. But not only that, if you look at Dealey Plaza, where when Kennedy was shot, you know, when the motorcade came around the corner, there's one man that is called the Umbrella Man. He's standing with a black umbrella.
Yeah, seen him.
There's been a lot of questions about why was he standing there with an umbrella. It was a sunny, beautiful day.
Yeah.
The thing was, his name was Roy Hargraves. He was very closely connected to Operation 40, and his task was to point out the crossfire point so that everybody, all shooters, would fire at the same exact time, because they couldn't have that, like 40 shots were being fired during 20 seconds. There was no way they could blame that on a lone crazy guy. Yeah. So they needed everybody to shoot at the same exact time.
And
that
he
was
cropped
his
up on
task.
he cropped up on the infamous Zapruder film, and he's quite noticeable in that. And I've heard theories from different researchers that he may have been some sort of trigger for one of the mind-controlled shooters, because they have different things that kind of trigger their programming and click them into assassin mode. And some researchers have suggested that him opening the umbrella may have been one of those mind-controlled triggers. But that's the first time I've heard that suggestion of what he may have been doing with the umbrella.
It's my suggestion, but I totally believe that, because that is where it was supposed to where the shots were supposed to be fired. But when you look at the Zapruder film, has been manipulated quite a lot, and what most people are not aware of that is that the motorcade came to almost a full stop behind the sign, the freeway highway sign, where the Zapruder film jumps. That the reason why it jumps is because they almost came to a full stop there, exactly right in front of the umbrella man. That is where everybody was supposed to shoot, but they didn't. Not all of them. So the car continued, and then it came to a full stop right in front of the grassy knoll where the final headshots were fired.
It might have suited them better to have the umbrella man edited out of the Zapruder film altogether, maybe.
No, the thing was that nobody is still, to this day, there's still discussions about it. But I truly believe, when you see his position, I believe that my theory is correct. But I cannot prove it. But that
could well
makes
be.
total sense. But the guy in front of him, there's a dark-skinned Cuban-looking guy who's standing right in front of him and who steps out in the streets waving, almost like to slow down the limo. His name, he was also closely connected to Operation 40, and his name was Felipe Vidal Santiago. Okay, so this Felipe Vidal Santiago, after this assassination, most of these people became like rock stars within the assassination business, because to carry a thing like that out, my God, they got like star status. So anyway, during many years after that, he worked under the alias of Charles Morgan, and he worked for a company that is called IT&T. It's a massive big company with telephone services. They were the ones that supplied Hitler and his whole, with Gestapo and Abwehr and all of these different organizations. They supplied the high top of telecommunications to him. Then in the States they did the same. And then when you look at Latin America, every single time where there has been a military coup and so on, IT&T have been very central. So I would say that company is a CIA in front. That is my opinion.
Yeah.
But anyway, Charles Morgan has been working for this company as a cover. And one of his tasks had been to go to different countries. He'd been to many different African countries also. But before an assassination, to go there and recruit people on location, people to become patsies without them knowing it, or people to be part of the assassination itself, or to help with logistics and so on. This very same Charles Morgan was in Stockholm in the fall of 1985, a few months before the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister, trying to recruit a shooter in Stockholm. So you got 3 different people connected to Dealey Plaza who was directly on location when 23 years later the Swedish Prime Minister was taken out.
Yeah, these dudes don't like retiring, do they?
The thing is, who were using them? And this is where we come back to Bush and people around him. Because this group of assassins have been following George Bush Sr.'s career the whole long way. And when they've been caught, a few of them, Luis Posada Carrilles is one of them, and another one is Orlando Bosch, also called Dr. Death. I mean, these 2 people, when you study the life of these people, it's like like a dictionary over terrorism and killings. It's just incredible. I've written a book called Coup d'etat in slow motion. It's about the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister, but with all the connections that I've been talking about, Iran-Contras, JFK, so many different of these things. But when and one of the people, just to show what type of people we're talking about, I've described the case of Orlando Bosch, also called Dr. Death, as I said. And it's just like what he was sentenced for. And it's like page up, page down, page up, page down, page up, page down, with different, bomb blowing up shops and airplanes and shooting with bazookas on the UN building. I mean, it's like a bad James Bond movie.
Nice, man.
But when these two went to jail, Orlando Bosch and Luis Posada Carillas, they were liberated. They were helped out, and pardoned by whom? George Bush Sr.
Who else?
Who else? And Luis Posada Carillas, now when we're talking about him, he, in my opinion, was the one that led the attack that almost killed Bob Marley on Jamaica in 1976, I think it was.
Oh, for real?
When he was attacked.
Yeah, when he almost got taken out there. Yeah.
Yeah, very close. Very, very close.
And when that didn't work, they sent a football boot spiked with some sort of cancer that finally finished him off by going into his toe a few years later.
It was right after that attack that the thing was, under this attack, his wife was hit in the head and his manager was hit 5 times. He himself, his chest was, what do you call it? He was, it just touched his chest, the bullet, and lodged in the left arm. But he still stood up, did the concert. It was a peace concert on Jamaica, because they would, at that time they were trying to destabilize Jamaica to take it over. And Kissinger was down there. The CIA boys were down there, and they were trying to do everything to create mayhem there so that they could more easily take over.
Oh boy!
When they didn't manage to kill Bob Marley, and they saw the power of this guy to still have the guts to stand up and do this concert, they just felt, my God, we need to take him out. So just a few weeks after that, there was a documentary maker, who approached Bob Marley. Who at that time he was surrounded by Rastafari, bodyguards and so on, and he said, "Please, I would very much like to do a documentary about you and show what you're all about and this whole thing." And Bob Marley was flattered, so he said, "Okay, fine." So this guy came and he brought a present, and it was a pair of cowboy boots, and this is where there was a copper wire that when he pulled the boot on, with people who were there was especially one photographer, prize-winning photographer. His name was Louis, I think, who saw it, and he said that when Bob pulled on the boot, he just cried out, and wow! And when he pulled off the boot, he found a copper wire inside it that had punctured his big toe. And
I've heard different versions of who presented him with the boots. In one version, it was the governor of Jamaica, I've heard. Another version was there was a CIA agent who was working undercover that was posing as, something else, and he was the one that gave him the boots.
No.
It was a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, but do you know who he is?
No.
His name was Carl Colby, and he's the son of William Colby, who is the former CIA director. Okay,
yes, I have heard that one before, yeah.
But that is not a theory. This is what happened. And Carl Colby was later one of the main witnesses in the O.J. Simpson trial.
Right.
You see these key people, they have a very bad tendency to pop up in many of these major cases.
They do, don't they?
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't want to accuse. This is a man who's still alive and still around. William Colby, his dad, was murdered, or he was found drowned. They said in the evening, he while making dinner, he suddenly decided to go out with a canoe, and he was found a couple of days later drowned. Left his computer, left everything on. The dinner was still waiting for him to be. Anyway, I would say taken out.
Yeah.
But no, dangerous shark waters they're living in. But I just wanted to say this thing with Carl Colby. I'm not accusing him of having done this on purpose. Maybe he was not aware of what was in the boot. Maybe he was just given it by people in the CIA to give this one just as. So I don't know if he was aware or not, but that was where, in my opinion, where the cancer of Bob Marley started in this toe.
Yeah.
It's a very, very rare form of cancer. And I must say, when you look at marijuana and the healing power it has over cancer and so on, maybe him being a heavy smoker was the thing that, a heavy cannabis smoker was the thing that prolonged his life for such a long time.
Well, yeah,
Because
certainly worth reflecting on.
he didn't die until 81, so that was like 4 or 5 years later. He actually died just a week or so after John Lennon. And John Lennon was also taken out by one of the people in Operation 40. Absolutely not Mark Chapman, the
Jose
guy
Paderno?
that killed John. Sorry?
Jose Paderno?
Jose Perdomo, yeah. Jose Perdomo was the doorman this evening, and he was, for 10 years, he was one of the highest ranking officers in Operation 40.
Yeah.
It's just unreal when you continue looking into these people. It's
So Mark Chapman was seen to, according to witnesses, assume a marksman position. He got down on his knees and supposedly fired at Lennon. But I have certainly heard the theory that Paderno, the doorman, was actually the assassin. So could it be that Mark Chapman was mind controlled to appear to shoot Lennon as a distraction to what really happened? And are there parallels there with Sirhan Sirhan in the case of Robert Kennedy, which you mentioned earlier? I think most people accept that Sirhan Sirhan was absolutely fitted up for that one and was a mind-controlled subject himself. Is that what we've seen in both instances there, do you think?
This thing, the people who saw Chapman go down in that shooting stand, that was the people that carried it out. These were the people.
Oh, so they were the witnesses.
Yeah,
the
he
witnesses
did not
were
go down
insiders.
like that. He did not go down like that. He didn't have a weapon. The thing is, that could be a theory, but when you look at Mark Chapman was standing to the right when Lennon and Yoko Ono arrived to the Dakota building. He was standing to the right. They got out of the car. Yoko Ono started walking in. John Lennon followed, and then the shots were fired that killed John. All shots fired came straight from the left, some of them so close together that it looked like one single bullet hole. So the question is, if Chapman was standing behind 2-3 meters and to the right, how on the earth could he hit him from the left, straight from the left? He couldn't. So who was standing to the left? The doorman, Jose Perdomo.
And Mark Chapman and Sirhan Sirhan are never getting out of jail to be able to tell their story. They're up for parole so many times, and every single time it gets overturned, and we're just going to see that until their dying day, sadly.
But the thing is, both of these people were mind-controlled.
No doubt.
And so they cannot even remember what happened. But it's, once again, you have Sirhan Sirhan, okay. At no point were he any closer than a meter and a half from Robert Kennedy. But he was all the time standing straight in front of him. So, of course, Robert Kennedy was hit 3 times straight from the front. Wrong. He was hit 3 times from the back and to the right. And the last, this final headshot were point blank. It even burned hole, the burn away hair from his skull. So the question is, who was standing behind and to the right? It could not be in any way or form be Sirhan Sirhan. He was shooting as well. But we're back to this mind-controlled shooter. He started shooting. There was 5 other people who were wounded at this thing. But as soon as Sirhan started shooting, they jumped him and threw him down on a steam table, got the struggle away and managed to get the gun away from him. But the gun only carried 8 bullets, but up somewhere between 13 and 14 shots were fired. So these are no-brainers. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to figure out if the gun has only got 8 bullets and 13 or 14 shots are fired, there must have been a second shooter.
Yep.
That is not being a conspiracy theorist. That is being a conspiracy researcher.
Yeah. What from your research and what you've been able to uncover are the most recent events that this Operation 40 group have been involved in? Because we've said that they don't really retire; they just go on decade after decade, the same characters, and their sort of fingerprints, I guess, are left everywhere. What have been the most recent events that people will be familiar with, where there's evidence of them having been involved?
I would say in 2004. I think it was 2004. They were trying to kill Fidel Castro with a bazooka when he was visiting the UN center, but it missed. I think that was Luis Posada Carillas and some other. But one that I know for sure was, in 1980. That was the same year as Lenin was taken out and so on. There's so many things happened around these years. That was the years when the whole Iran conscious thing was going on, before it was found out and so on. But on the 4th of December 1980, that is just a few days before the killing of John Lennon.
Yeah, 4 days before,
Yeah, there was a small aircraft carrying the Portuguese Prime Minister Francisco de Sá Carneiro and Defense Minister Adelino Amaro da Costa that blew up in the air. They had just taken off from the airport in Lisbon, and it crashed in a little, area in the outskirts of Lisbon called Camarate. And, well, the initial investigation concluded that the incident was an accident, but really, when you looked at it, it had just taken off when it exploded. It was just like a couple of 100 meters from the airstrip itself that it went down. And they've done it over and over and over again. Official investigations found no, it was an accident. No, it was an accident. No, it was an accident. But very recently, it's come out that people, we've got back to our old favorite, Henry Kissinger was very involved in this. Also, Frank, what's his name, from the Carlyle Group, Frank, Lacucci? No, sorry, I can't remember. Frank Carlucci, from the Carlyle Group, who was also, after this event, became the deputy director of the CIA. He was very much involved in the planning of this thing, and the person that paid for the bomb to be manufactured was Frank Sturgis. Now, Frank Sturgis was one of the shooters at Dealey Plaza. He was also one of the Watergate burglars. Yeah. And he was involved in so many other things. These people have been extremely busy for decades and decades. Yeah. So...
Really? And around that time, you were talking 1980, 81, I think it was in 81, was the assassination attempt on Reagan, John Hinckley. And I think the plan was to have Reagan taken out so that George H.W. Bush could assume the presidency. I imagine that was the plan, but that one didn't quite work.
I totally agree, but it still worked because it scared Reagan away. He was still the front face, but after that assassination attempt, it was Bush that was pulling the strings behind the scenes. So I would say when you look at George Herbert Walker Bush, that's George Bush Sr., he came from a very, very evil, I would say, family. His father, Prescott Bush, he was part of, I would say that he was the mind behind the fake Zimmerman telegram, which was it wasn't a real telegram, but that was a telegram that tricked the U.S. to go in and take part of the First World War. Then the Bush family, together with the Dulles brothers, were working very closely together with Adolf Hitler, where Prescott Bush was part of financing the Hitler war machine.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the money guy that came in and helped them. He was tried. I think there was a case, at least he was accused of treason after the Second World War. But then he and these people, like the Dulles brothers, they were Wall Street lawyers working together with Hitler. They were the ones. The Dulles brothers they were the architects behind the the Versailles Peace Treaty that totally humiliated Germany and put them in an awful, awful situation, preparing for World War II.
Yeah.
Then we had the financing, the help with the financing through Bush, and then you had, after the Second World War, when Germany officially lost, you had the whole Operation Paperclip, where they exported Nazi experts in all different areas, rocket scientists within security, intelligence, all of these things from Gestapo and so on. That was organized. One of the organizers were Alan Dulles from the Dulles brothers, who then became and used these people to start up OSS, and that was later turned into the CIA with the help of these Nazi experts. Also, NASA was created with these people, and also the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, that we've seen a lot of over the years. Every time there's one of these swine flu freak, how to scare the living bejesus out of
Ebola, whatever.
That's the one. They even own the patents of some of these diseases, like the Ebola virus and so on. So you have to be very aware of these companies and who are behind them. And then they were part of they were part of taking JFK out. And then Alan Dulles, of course, was in the Warren Commission covering the whole thing up. And so it's the same small group of people that have been. They took over in a very brutal coup d'etat on November 22nd, 1963, and they have stayed in power ever since.
That's right. I mean, a lot of people consider that the world changed forever, which it did, on the 11th of September 2001, and nothing's been the same since. And you can kind of divide, those of us alive today can sort of divide our lives into two halves, really. That which happened before 11th of September 2001 and that which happened afterwards. And I guess for the previous generation, it was all about 22nd of November 1963. Those two events really did change so much of what was to follow.
And we're looking at the same players behind them. This is the thing.
Really?
But do you know what happened on 9/11 exactly 10 years earlier, in 1991?
This was George H.W. Bush's speech about ushering in a new world order?
There you go.
Yep.
They are so aware of these dates.
10 years to the day.
Yeah, 10 years to the date. Yeah, so not by accident.
Absolutely.
Also 9/11... the day when Salvador Allende was killed and the military coup. Also 9/11 when the Swedish foreign minister Anna Lindh was killed, trying to push Sweden into accept the euro, the currency of the euro. That was 9/11. It's like that is a very important date to them.
Oh yeah.
But also the Kennedy assassination, I would say it was almost... when they killed, it was like the Kennedy clan was knocked out and overtaken by the Bush clan that have stayed in the game ever since.
Yeah, so it seems. And they just keep batting it back and forth between the Bushes and the Clintons, it seems, or their lackeys. It's been going on for decades.
But the thing was that Bush have by far been the stronger ones. We're talking about George Herbert Walker Bush, not Boy George, the latest one.
Oh, yeah,
he's
Village
just
idiot.
a pretty face, no brain whatsoever. And Jeb Bush, absolutely the same.
Yeah.
And I just want to say
Well, it's inbreeding, you see. It doesn't work after a few generations.
But also, like I said, that George Bush Sr. was part of setting up the whole thing that was later known as the Iran-Contra scandal, where weapons were stolen from the National Guard in the States, sent down to countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, where they set up what was called the enterprise, where they created the Medellin cartel, because they didn't want to deal with hundreds of different drug dealers down there. So they created this cartel so that they had one partner down there to work with. They were working directly with Pablo Escobar and people like that. Chip Tatum, I mentioned before?
Yeah.
He lives in a house that he's renting from Pablo Escobar's brother, and Chip used to be one of the pilots flying up and down.
Yeah. Okay.
But, sorry?
Yeah, carry on.
No, so when at this point where they needed to get the drugs into the States, they were looking for small airstrips where they could fly in these big military planes without nobody noticing. And that is where they found this place called Mina in Arkansas. It's a tiny little town, I think about 5,000 inhabitants, and with a small little airstrip. And this is one of the places they flew in tons and tons and tons of raw cocaine into the States that was then distributed out to gangs in LA, Chicago, Miami, with the intention of totally destabilizing the American society, get the crime rates up, get the minorities to kill each other. They pumped in a lot of guns. They invested heavily in private-owned jails so that they could just, destroy American society. And this is what we've seen. But the people who were sometimes there personally receiving these drugs were a governor at that time, totally unknown, by the name of William Clinton.
Bill Clinton. There you go, Little Rock, Arkansas.
Who was a very shady character. He and Hillary were already deep into different types of estate frauds and many other shady businesses, together with a partner called Dan Lasseter and other people. But after that, when Bill Clinton became one of the gang, he was looked upon by the Bilderberg Group because they were looking for somebody to be the next person in charge, the next front face in the States and so on. So he looked good. He even looked a little bit like Kennedy. He met Kennedy. He had a nice manner, and they invited him for the Bilderberg meeting, and boom, I think 2 years later, he was president.
There's a video that I saw a few years ago, which you may have seen as well, in the wake of the Haiti earthquake. And it's got George Bush Jr., and Bill Clinton walking around the disaster zone of the Haiti earthquake, which many people suspect was caused by HAARP, but we won't go there today because we'll be here for hours. But they're meeting these victims of the earthquake, and Bush shakes the hand of one of these guys that's been involved in the earthquake, and immediately he wipes his hand on the shirt of Bill Clinton because he's obviously in disgust at this person that he's had to shake hands with that he didn't want to, and he wipes his hand down Clinton's shirt. And it speaks so much about the pecking order and the hierarchy of these people. And Clinton is obviously viewed as a sort of subordinate of the Bushes. And, it was so telling what Bush did in that instant through impulse. Did you see that video? No, I have not seen it. I would very much like to see it. But this is exactly it. If you think that at least to start with, the Clinton was way down the food chain, way down. And is obviously still regarded in that way because this would have been, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. So Clinton had been president already, but Bush still seemed to regard him as his subordinate. Yeah, but then you have Hillary, who is she's a totally different league, This is a power-hungry, very ruthless woman. Oh, yes. Very ruthless. And when you look at the Clinton, the couple, they have, there's a whole long row of very, very odd suicides and murders and assassinations and, long row of people. If they get in their way, boom, they're taken out.
one way or another.
Yeah.
And this woman, now they say, oh, who should we choose, Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton? It's like taking two shotguns, one from your right temple, the other one to the left, and just say, which one do you want to pull?
What a choice.
Both of them are deadly.
Yeah.
Because also, one of the people involved in Operation 40 was a pilot called Barry Seal. He was the one that created and really made a whole, like an industry out of this weapons out, drugs in. And by the way, he was taken out just 1 week before the Swedish Prime Minister, and he was killed in an ambush when he was just about to give evidence against George Bush Sr. He even had his phone number in his pocket when he was gunned down by 8 different shooters. And they said that it was a gang, like a drug cartel hit, but absolutely not.
Yeah.
Chip Tatum overheard when George Bush Sr. gave the order to Ollie North to take out Barry Seal. But anyway, Barry Seal had a lot of evidence. He was carrying around 3 boxes with evidence everywhere where he was. Because one of the things he had filmed once he went in a very, very, very nice, super modern Cessna to Miami to deliver drugs. And the people receiving it, that he filmed receiving it, was Jeb Bush and George Walker Bush, the 2 Bush boys, receiving the drugs. Then after Barry Seal was assassinated, this plane, this very beautiful twin-engine super-duper plane, suddenly appeared in belonging to George Bush Jr. Go figure.
Yeah. Ole, I'll have to wrap it up in a minute, mate, but it seems a good point to just talk for a minute about the Open Mind Conference in Copenhagen in September. We touched on this with Frank Rasmussen in the last podcast, and he was talking about the interview that you're going to be doing with Judith Vary Baker, which sounds very interesting. You're going to be touching on the Kennedy assassination there. Do you want to just give us a little preview of what people can expect at that event in September?
Yeah, there's... you're going to be there. I'm going to be there.
Yeah, can't wait.
Judith Vary Baker, which is... I had the immense pleasure of meeting her for a few days in Stockholm this summer. In February, actually. And for me, it was an incredible experience because this, in my opinion, is one of the most important witnesses in the world at the moment, I think. Some people know her as the lover and girlfriend of Lee Harvey Oswald. But she was also, she was one of the brightest minds in Florida in the early 60s. And she was a cancer researcher that was recruited by the CIA because what they were trying to create a bioweapon to take out Fidel Castro. But the story is much bigger than that because the virus that they were going to use, it was a virus called SV40. That virus came from the polio vaccine that had just been injected into about 200 million Americans, and also here in Europe, about 1 million, I think 1 million people in Europe and some in Russia as well. Now, it was when this happened, this was before Judith Vary Baker was recruited, but her boss, Altan Oshner, a very respected doctor, he was sort of the face out on the presenting the polio vaccine that they had worked very hard to create. Just it was the same type of hype around, like when the swine flu was around. The same that everybody needs to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
But just before it was about to be released, there was a female researcher that found out that, oh my God, it's infected by live viruses, cancer-causing viruses, because it had been grown on monkey kidneys, and some of these viruses were still alive. They need to be dead in a vaccine. So she went out and said, please, we need to stop this. But Altan Oshner said, absolutely no way are we going to stop this. And nobody says anything. So just to go out and publicly show that he had total faith in this vaccine, he injected his 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl. Well, the boy died within 24 hours, and the girl had polio for the rest of her life. And still, they injected more than 200 million Americans. But not injected. They gave it in the form of a few drops on a sugar. This is where the old song, put a show do 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 with a little bit of sugar, the medicine goes down or something like that. I don't know the English version. That was part of that campaign.
How did he react when his own grandchildren fell ill like that?
Well, that happened before the vaccine was released. So I mean, what type of person could do that? But still, even after they found out what it was involved and they were totally aware of it, they kept pushing it out until all of it was used like 3 or 4 years later. I was one of them who received these drops, you know. So there's so many of us. But the awful thing was that they found out that this very, very vicious virus called SV40 was in the vaccine, and in many of us that were kids at that time or adults, it's still in our body, and it can very easily get activated by X-rays and other things. And this, according to Judith Very Baker, is the reason why we have this cancer epidemic now. So we're talking like a world scandal on a scale never heard of before, because they anticipated that this epidemic would start in early 80s, mid 80s. You know, they saw that coming all the way in the early 60s, and they were working very hard on trying to find a cure. And this was when they found this SV40 and saw how vicious it was. And then Altan Ochner came up with the idea, let's turn it around and use it as a weapon. So Judith Very Baker was very involved in trying to make this into a weapon, together with people like David Ferry. He's the guy in the JFK movie with the wig and the strange eyebrows. Sorry?
Played by Joe Pesci.
That's the guy.
Yeah.
He was actually involved in this bioweapon in Louisiana and New Orleans. And another guy that was involved in doing that was Lee Harvey Oswald. So there were many different things going on at the same time. And anyway, this was one of the reasons why they had to kill Lee Oswald, because he knew too much about too many things.
Wow. That's going to be a fascinating discussion and an amazing presentation that Judith Very Baker is doing her own presentation, I know, on this subject. So, Open Mind Conference, September. Get your asses out there. You'll be very glad you did. And your own website, as we said, Ole, lightonconspiracies.com, right?
Yeah. And I would just say that I've done this for about 30 years of my life. I'm not employed by anyone. I'm not working. I'm just a simple, ordinary guy who's devoted his life for truth. If anyone wants to support me, there are donation buttons on the website. Buy my book, sign up for my newsletter, anything like that. Because without your support, it's very hard for me to carry on. I have a family to feed and so on.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I just want to say on a high note that I really strongly feel that 2015 is the year it's going to turn around, and this world is going to see a future that is so beautiful on the other side. But we need to transcend this very, very dark threat that is surrounding us at the moment.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Stay strong and let's do this.
Thank you for those words. All right, I know we'll be speaking again soon, Ole. See you in September, and keep doing what you do and stay safe, and all the best to you.
You too. Thank you so much, Mark.
This is just a ride.
Vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations.